This new
destined perhaps for Kosovo was being embarked in the German port of Emden today. Some 400 Challenger tanks, Warrior armoured vehicles and heavy guns will be shipped over the next 2 weeks to Greece, where they will await the go-ahead should there be a peace agreement for them to police.
The reason we're loading it now is to make sure that if we're asked to help implement a peace agreement, and that obviously has not yet happened, then we're in a position to respond quickly and effectively.
The dispatch of tanks is a reminder to Serbs and Kosovars of NATO's muscle. Their delegations were locked into a second week of talks in a French chateau. The Russian foreign minister, the latest statesman to urge them to reach agreement.
There is no military solution to this problem, only a political one.
We are against any kind of foreign troops.
But the Serbs are opposed to any NATO intervention and have said that if the West carries out its threat of airstrikes, that would constitute a war crime. The parties have until Saturday to reach agreement. If they do, these troops will be part of a 30,000-strong force sent to Kosovo indefinitely to keep the peace. Kevin Dunn, ITN.
Parents whose children died after heart surgery.
The foods have been introduced too hastily.
In his constituency this weekend, the Prime Minister fielded questions on the controversy. But today he came out strongly in favour of genetically modified foods. His aides said he was happy to eat them, believing those on our shelves had been rigorously tested. His concern is that the truth about the science behind GM foods has not been adequately explained to the public. There are only 3 genetically modified products on our shelves: tomato paste, maize and soya. Genetically modified ingredients are used in the processing of some foods, such as cheese, although they don't end up in the final product. We're already using medicines which contain genetically modified ingredients. In the future, scientists believe they'll produce GM plants which have extra vitamins and even vaccines in them. Instead of taking a pill or injection, you'd eat a plant. These are not yet on the market. Many fears over GM foods lie with those which haven't yet reached the food chain. At Nottingham University, they're seeing if it's possible to produce fruits and vegetables with added vitamins, which last longer or contain medicines. Nothing will be used for food without years of tests. As yet, no GM crops are grown for food here in the UK. This is a test field of oilseed rape. Until this week's row over GMs, the government expected to give the go-ahead for the first crop bound for the food chain next year. That could be delayed.
There are no proposals at the present time for commercially growing any genetically modified crop in this country, and it won't occur this year.
As the experiments continue, the Cabinet is divided over whether these crops should in fact be grown at all in Britain. Some Labour MPs are supporting 20 pressure groups, who tomorrow will call for a 5-year delay in growing GM crops here.
I think we need more time in order to evaluate the science, and I think it's essential that we have a moratorium now so that we don't introduce new genetically modified foods, and also that we don't actually go to full commercial planting of these crops.
Despite the assurances of scientists, the government and the industry, it's those who have doubts who are currently winning the debate on GM foods. Margaret Gilmore, BBC News.
And our chief political correspondent, John Sargent, is at Westminster. John, why is the Prime Minister giving genetically modified food his backing when so many eminent scientists disagree about it?
Well, it's not a general backing. What he's saying is that the GM foods that are at present on sale and are being used in Britain, those have been checked, and he's giving his full support to that procedure. They're also pointing out at number 10 that no new GM foods have been approved by this government. In fact, they've not been approved for 2 years. So from that point of view, the Prime Minister is saying, look, as far as your food in the shops is concerned, he personally has no hesitation in eating the food that has GM material in it.
So could we see Tony Blair doing a John Gummer and offering genetically modified food to his children?
I think that's unlikely. I think that John Gummer gave that whole idea a bad name. But I think we can see the government in the same sort of dilemma as the Tories were over BSE. The public are worried. How do you reassure them? How do you do that dramatically and in such a way that strikes home? So all the Prime Minister has done so far is to put it out through his own press office that he personally is completely satisfied.
Now, the Conservatives are going flat out on this and calling for 2 government ministers to resign. Where does the row go from here?
Well, I think the row certainly goes on. What the government is saying is that there does need to be clearer labelling. It is important that restaurants and catering establishments also say when they're using GM food, and they're considering an entirely new advisory committee, and they'll decide this in April, and whether it should also include retailers, consumer groups and so on. So there is some way to go.
John, thanks very much indeed. And later in the programme, our consumer correspondent June Kelly will be looking at whether new food labelling plans can reassure shoppers about genetically modified food.
People with severe personality disorders, which make them